So in this session, we're going to talk about value stream mapping, the way people normally think about it with numbers and all that, but also the relationships between delays, feedback, and dealing with complexity. See, this is something I haven't talked about yet. But when you study the value stream, you can start seeing how it actually tells you a lot about what knowledge work and software development and things like that are. You can learn a lot about how this stuff works. And that's one of the other things I really love about it. So even though I don't actually do value stream mapping very often this way with the numbers, having done it for so many years, there are a lot of insights that can be really good. So here's one way this is the way I kind of do value stream mapping. There's not a right way. I'm not, the Karen Martin and what's his name? James Martin, I forget now, that was mentioned earlier. They have great books, visualizing books. I mean, they're just wonderful. I definitely recommend you learn about these. These are really great resources. But this is how I do it. I have a simple way. I like simple, not simplistic, not overly simple, but I found that a nice, clear process can work a lot. So the first thing I do is I don't worry about the details. I just look at the steps: request, approve, requirements. Now I have these here as they look like stickies because that's how I used to do it. I'd go to a whiteboard, then you could rearrange it, you can move them around, all that stuff. And in fact, this worked quite well. So it's like identify the actions taken in the value stream. That's the first thing I do. And I use stickies, I can move them around. And then I would look, this took 8 hours. The approval process took a day. This took 3 weeks. And I highly recommend you use hours across. I don't care. Don't say this was so many months or so many weeks or, a day, because you eventually have to convert it all when you add it. So just start with hours. I don't usually say do this, but this one's so simple. And I think you can see why. But of this 120 hours, they worked on these requirements about a third of their time. Why? Because they were working on one or two other things. This is kind of obvious, okay, that these numbers won't be the same. This review was 2 hours because they got it done. So, but usually it's all like some fraction of things. And then you look at, well, we got the request, but it was 8 weeks before it got approved. These guys were batching requests. So this is an average. We're doing average of things. Okay. And if you do this actually on a whiteboard, don't draw this between the stickies, because if you move the stickies, then this arrow is going to be driven up there. What I do is I use a sticky if I'm literally using a whiteboard. If I'm using Visio or Miro or something like that, I would draw it. But notice if you're doing stickies at a board, put this on a sticky. But that's not quite how it works, because sometimes I've got to go back. So 20% of the time, I don't know what rejective is. I guess it's a special kind of rejected. But sometimes I have to go back. It got rejected one time, 20% of the work, 3 times, half the time it's rejected. You can tell I was copying and pasting here. So what I do now is I got these loop backs. Okay, now what I do is I add up the times. So I add up the times worked. See, these are the green versus the calendar time. Okay, which is basically from here to here. And by the way, this is a good test. In other words, 21, what's that about? 50 weeks, 50 times 40. Yeah, this is about 54 weeks. So if this took over a year, if that's not what actually happened, you don't have a good value stream map. So you could start using this to see, is that about right calendar time? And this says, oh, well, we're about half the time, a fourth of the time. This is what's called the process cycle efficiency time. Now here I'm showing it at 26%. These usually come in, if you're not doing Agile at all, between 5 and 15%. If you are doing Agile, they're still probably not so great, 15 to 25%. The idea is not to get this number up. You can do that just by being very wasteful in there. The idea is just really shock value. There's a lot of waste, a lot of waiting time, and you can start seeing it. And here's what's really bad about this, is what happens while it's waiting. We're going to get into that. But the other thing is, as Don Reinertson mentions, we've got a project that could take a few weeks, but it's taking over a year. The cost of delay, what would have the value have been if we had delivered this in 15 weeks instead of 22 weeks? 15 weeks instead of 54 weeks. What value could we have had in that 39 weeks? That's the cost of delay. That value we could have had, we lost. That's the cost. That's what he's saying. By the way, he's written this way back. In fact, in this book, he debunks the idea that we have to just use empiricism. He talks about theories. Obviously, he's talking about principles and products. He lays out hundreds of them. That's another interesting principles of. He wrote a blog for me once, types of processes. I'll put that. I'll write a note. I'll put that in the resources for the industrious person who wants to get into the theory of it. It's a brilliant article. But see, when you look at this, see what gives you a better return? Getting better at what you do. In other words, cutting that 80 down to 40, or cutting that 200 down to 100. See, this is the big insight also of value stream mapping. Is the idea is not to go faster in your work, but to cut out the delays between your work. I'm going to say that again. The idea is not to go faster in your work, but to cut out the delays between your work. And this is all be caused by multitasking, obviously. So what can we learn from this? Where our handbags or loopbacks, whatever you want to call them, where our large queues are, because you'll see them. You know, how much time is work waiting? This is nice if you have a tool. Most tools do not give this to you, but some can put them in. Help us understand where we need to focus, where value is being delayed, because anywhere you're waiting, it's being delayed. And feedback where you're not getting feedback. Also, what we'll see inherent simplicity. I'll talk about that more this in the strategy, the systems thinking. But the idea of inherent simplicity, this comes from Goldratt, it talks about in The Choice, is that a lot of these factors work together. And it's worth mentioning this a little bit right here. There's a pattern here we're talking about, global versus local optimization, having big things instead of little things, having multitasking. These all, you can almost imagine how they work together with each other, or they don't. You know, you start one, it unravels. These things, this is a good thing. This means as we start making smaller pieces, getting quicker feedback, that helps us reduce delays, helps waste, helps us keep under our capacity of working. That's basically what this means. A few things at the core are working for us. And the question, of course, is how do we do this? Now, this course, these sessions aren't so much that. That's what we do in our workshops. Okay. There is this question of how much of what is done is valuable. And you actually, I was including the hours of fixing things that we shouldn't have been causing. A lot of people say that's waste, and it is, to be technically right, doing right value stream mapping. I included in the work done because it's just not worth arguing. The numbers are so horrendous. So instead of 26, it would have been 30%. Excuse me, instead of 26 process cycle efficiency, it would have been 22% or 18%. It's still horribly low. So you can decide to be accurate or decide to make it an easier conversation. The question is how much work is work of our work is rework. Now I had this picture, John, because it's kind of interesting. See, neither of those people realize they're working against each other. One guy's got his back, they've got their back to each other. They don't see what's happening, that one group, one person is hurting another person. We often do not see this. It just happens. And that's an important thing to notice. We don't get feedback in the physical, in the software world the way we do in the physical world. This was inspired by a cartoon I saw from Real World. That was the name of the cartoon. They had a big cube in the background built of bricks, and the pharaoh was saying, oh, did I say cube? I meant pyramid. Same thing. See, in the physical world, you see this stuff. In the virtual world, you don't. And this is really important to notice. And the perfect, now just one small change was just a little joke. How customers are always telling me to make these massive changes that they thought were easy. And that's what they said. And actually with good design, I could often do it, but it was like they had no idea what was happening. Okay, so what happens when adding value is delayed? You know, between getting requirements, using them, writing a bug and it being detected, you know, between two groups getting out of sync. We call these integration errors, but they're really two groups getting out of sync. We integrated properly, it detected the fact that they're out of sync. We're just waiting for somebody. See, I'm going to suggest that something bad and insidious and not even noticed is happening. So let's just look at some work. I'm not going to worry about what's technically valuable or not, because in manufacturing, if you've got a car designed and you're building it, anything that doesn't add value to the customer, building the car, maybe that's waste because there's no discovery. In product development, it's a lot more complicated. And I don't like saying, well, if you're not writing a line of code that's bug-free, it's waste. That's too simplistic. That's taking it from the manufacturing world. Lean is not any more about manufacturing than physics is about apples falling on people's head. That's just where it started. Lean is saying, let's look at, are we adding value? And that may be discovery. It may be planning, could be a lot of things. But these things are clearly not good. These things are clearly waste. Okay, so we know that. Now, you might ask the question, planning or testing, you can't overplan, obviously. You can't overtest or do it manually. I put the question marks here because it's worth looking at. Are we overplanning? Yeah, if you plan and you don't use it, that's waste. But the planning itself that you use, I wouldn't say is waste. Testing is interesting because some testing can be automated or not. And then there's some things you can do. But notice how those things on the left versus those things on the right. Notice how delays in the workflow cause problems. You might notice, why do I put fixing bugs? See, most devs, I've been a dev for, well, I started programming in 71, but I haven't done a lot of development work now for about 20 years. But it never gets out of your body. Most devs think they spend a lot of time fixing bugs. The reality is they spend a lot of time finding the bug. And that's different because if you make a bug and you find it immediately, you know what you did, you fix it real quickly. If you wait a week or you don't detect it for a week, you got to find it, then you do the same fix. That's why I put in that automated testing back in the 80s. I kind of realized this. Integration errors, because they're not integration errors, they're out of sync errors detected in integration. See, these things on the right are just time bombs waiting to go off as delay. That's the key. The longer you wait, the worse this stuff ages. And this is a problem. You can improve testing if you automate it, but otherwise you can't go faster. Okay. I don't know if, can we go faster? Question was there, I didn't say it. How much time do you spend on the right? Most people have no idea, but a lot. So this is another problem. Not only are you only spending 20, 30% of your time on your product, probably most of that work is wasted work. So it's horrible. The situation we're in is horrendous. And the fact that most people aren't even talking about it is just really not a good thing. Now, here's a question. Why would we expect executives to understand the value of Agile if you'd understand the underlying theory by which it works? This is a pet peeve of mine. You've probably seen it in my LinkedIn. I believe, we're going to talk about this in another session, but that you can get a solid understanding of what's going on. We've already talked about a lot of things. You don't see everything, but that doesn't mean you don't see anything. So the cost of delay for value is important. Cost of delay in the workflow is waste. Cost of interruptions in the workflow is waste. All these things cost us. We must shift the thinking from how busy people are to eliminating delays in the workflow. And this is a really insightful comment from Goldratt in the choice. A comfort zone has less to do with control and more to do with knowledge. Now, by this, what is important about this? You think of executives and you think of managers. They got to where they got to by solving problems. They like to understand. And now all of a sudden we're saying, oh, this Agile stuff's great. Just, trust us. No, they're going to go back to their comfort zone. And their comfort zone is probably command and control. So we drive them into command and control because we're not giving them the knowledge. This is another advantage of value streams. So the more we push, the worse we get. Too many projects, too big, value delivered too late. This is a problem. Overloading teams results in even bigger delays and more work to do. So here's the way I talk to executives. And I've had this conversation. This, by the way, is in our coaching book. I mentioned the 2 books. So yeah, that was another thing to put on the resources, coaching book. Okay. So what I've done is you go in and you talk. You find the project that happened that took about a year, say, and it could have been done in a third of the time if you weren't interrupting it all the time. And you ask if they would have been willing to pay 20% more to get it done in 4 months instead of 12. They'll almost certainly say yes. It is an important project. But would it really take more time? Remember, it's all these delays that are causing extra work. So if we focus on them, yeah, we might lose some time by having the focus and not everybody's fully utilized. But we eliminate all this waste. It'll take less time because you have to work not on speeding things up, but on removing delays. This is a very important realization. Okay. So removing delays in your workflow is the key. Too much work in process causes delays in workflow, creates more work. It's a vicious cycle. What we want to do is getting to work within capacity, quick feedback, eliminate waste. Again, Goldratt, I don't know where this comes from. I've read it quoted, but I don't know what book. But reducing batch size is all it takes to bring a system back into control. So we want to do smaller things, quicker feedback, and that really helps tremendously. Okay, so what have we learned? Value streams have us focus on lowering the time between the work steps, delays between the work steps, delay feedback, and the delivery of value, which causes waste. So if we can quicken feedback and quicken these, if we can shorten these delays, get better feedback, we lower waste. Delays are doing to have too much process, too large items. And we can use these insights to talk to executives about why they should be attending to the most important initiatives and not those of lesser importance. I remember one of our consultants used to say this all the time. Okay, here's the most important thing. We all agree to it, right? Okay. Here's the next most important thing. Now I want to ask you, because I've seen this happen, that people slow down the most important thing for lesser important things because they want to keep people busy. I want to ask you, why would you do that? You've got something way more important than this other. Okay, maybe the top two are pretty important, but the third, fourth, fifth, they should not be impacting the top. You talk to them in their language and you get better results than talk to them in your language.